Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a different prize shortlist, and that is the two shortlists for the Polari Prize. So I'm going to do these as two separate videos, but essentially the Polari Prize is a UK-based LGBTQ book prize that focuses on books that basically kind of cover and showcase various parts of the LGBTQ community. It's worth noting as well that you'll sort of notice as I talk, but the books in the shortlists can be pretty much any type of book. So non-fiction, memoir as well comes up, poetry, short stories, novels, of course, and things like that. So it's quite broad and quite varied, and there's something quite exciting about that because you kind of have these two things, well, these multiple genres and types of book up against each other in quite an exciting way. So let's get started. The first book prize first, and I'll do a separate video that is just talking about the wider book prize, which is for non-debut books. So first up, let's get going. So up first, going by author surname, we have These Great Athenians by Valentine Carter. And this, I mean, apart from anything else, is just a really incredibly physically beautiful book. So we've obviously got these little kind of coloured edges, but then you've also got these kind of gorgeous sort of range of colours throughout the whole book. Anyway, beautiful. But the book itself is sort of retelling sort of various myths from sort of the Odyssey, and kind of really focusing on some of the women's perspectives, but in doing so really kind of uncovers this sort of beauty of language, but also of the women's kind of struggles in trying to make various things happen. So it's kind of this, it's not only sort of serving as a sort of translation, but almost not even really a retelling, but kind of just a way of going back through these stories and finding new aspects of them. It's incredibly beautifully written. I found just so many of the parts of this really touching and really beautiful, and it's just really exciting to kind of read this, especially as somebody who, I read the Odyssey and struggled a little bit with it. So actually this felt like a bit more of an accessible way of me reading some of these bits. And particularly, I think in doing so, this book is trying to highlight the women's voices and give them a new lease of life in this collection as well. Next up, we have Elizabeth Chakrabarty with Lessons in Love and Other Crimes. And this book sort of takes a bit of a multimodal, I guess, approach to things. So it is sort of in some ways a novel in and of itself, but there are various parts that are non-fiction that kind of tie in with it. So it almost feels a bit scrapbook like, you've got the main story and you've got non-fiction bits that highlight something else underneath the surface. And what I think is really quite effective about that is the main sort of novel aspect talks a lot about this woman facing a lot of discrimination for being a South Asian woman, for being a lesbian, and sort of how she really struggles to be heard or feel represented or feel respected in various spaces. And that in and of itself would have been an interesting book, but I think then it's really interesting having these additional parts that are passages sort of basically saying, well, yeah, that did happen to me, or kind of reinforcing some of those parts. And that for me really lifted parts of this book to be quite really, sort of especially clever to kind of think of, we're presented with a novel basically, and then we're told it's basically me being put in this book, and here's what it looked like when this thing happened to me. And that kind of changes then how we see parts of the novel sort of aspect of it, at the centre of it. So yeah, really interesting book, and we learn a lot about her struggles, particularly to kind of feel that she belongs in any real way. Quite profoundly challenging things happen around her, and we sort of see how the wider culture and wider sort of sense of safety doesn't always feel like it's there for her in the same way that it is for other people as well. Next up, we have All the Things She Said by Daisy Jones. And if the title makes you automatically start singing the song by Tattoo, you're in luck, because she talks about that. But essentially, this is Daisy Jones talking through various moments in LGBTQ plus culture, particularly around women and sort of femme non-binary people within the community, of how various parts of their identities have sort of been formed and shaped and celebrated and vilified over time. And it particularly takes a bit of a lens on culture, so especially things like TV and film and music, hence again the title. But it also looks at, for example, things about how the internet more broadly kind of shapes some of these cultures as well. And we have, for example, things like dating shows on TV and the first kind of lesbian or queer ones, and the impact that has on people finding their identity. Things like the L Word, the real L Word as well, which is then the sort of real reality TV sort of spin-off, and all these sort of other things that I thought was really quite interesting, and sort of is written with a lot of warmth and a lot of humour as a book. And it's just also quite interesting because I realise from my own perspective as a gay man, there's a lot that, you know, I've been sort of fairly focused on sort of various things that were really instrumental for me as a young gay man, and it's really interesting to sort of see another side of the coin for what else was going on at the time as well. Next up, we have This Much Is True by Miriam Margolyes, and Miriam Margolyes is, you know, a bit of a wonderfully odd national treasure. She is known for sort of being potty-mouthed and audacious and kind of out there. But actually there was a lot about her that I didn't know, and this memoir of hers is a really interesting way of piecing together some of this. And interestingly, early on she says, look, I'm not just going to be silly and potty mouth and naughty throughout this book, partly because her partner doesn't want her to, but also because she has a lot more a lot of other things to say. And this book ends up being quite a profound and beautiful story about her growing up, about her kind of early stages of her careers, of course full of bawdy jokes and, you know, silliness, but also these really beautiful passages where she talks about realizing who she was as a lesbian, about her Jewish identity, and about, you know, various other parts of who she is. And I think it just comes together in this really lovely book. You know, we'd have obviously hoped Miriam Margolyes could write as well as she sort of talks and what have you, and she really does in this book. And it's just a charm, an absolutely charming book to read, and yeah, I enjoyed this a great deal. And last but not least, we have a book that I spoke about recently in a weekly wrap-up, which I loved, Deep Sniff by Zmith. And this is a book that looks at the history of poppers, and kind of draws a bit of a line between kind of the early days of kind of poppers kind of coming up and kind of early queer sort of nightlife to kind of now, and how things have changed during that time. And also at the time, during all of this, is kind of a bit of a meditation, I guess, on his own identity and how he sees himself within the kind of queer community as well. So really fascinating book in so many ways. And I know in my weekly review I sort of said this as well, but it almost has no right to be as good as it is. I think it's just such a, it shouldn't work as a book, and I just found the way it ties together really clever and really interesting, and really greatly enjoyed this. So yeah, just a bizarre little book, and it covers, you know, so much within that around shame and pleasure and how people came to understand who they were, and how various things changed all of that. So, you know, with the HIV and AIDS epidemic. At first, it was people thought that because many of the people who were falling ill had been taking poppers, people made an assumption that those two things were connected, and so it was believed at first that it wasn't anything to do with any of the sex that was being had; it was entirely the poppers, and so that radically changed then how we saw things. And in many ways, Adam Smith also makes a bit of a case that maybe we would be thinking differently about pleasure and nightlife and identities had that not happened. You know, that we've kind of lost the sense of guilt-free joy through that, perhaps, but how that's maybe again changing in modern life now. And that takes us to the end of the shortlist. And of the 5 books, which, you know, I've got 3 of them here. I mean, it's a really fun shortlist. I'm really enjoying this. You know, and I love the process of reading them all. I would really love to see Deep Sniff by Adam Zmith take this, because I think it's a really great book. I think it's just so interesting. I also think all the things she said was just a really fun read as well. Obviously Miriam Margolyes is there as well, you know, and you can never really rule her out. A really interesting set of books, which I really do urge you to go and read if you get the chance. I think they're all really beautiful and really interesting in their own right. And yeah, we'll find out very, very soon who the winners are, but just a great prize. And I think partly because of the timing of it, it does often mean that you get to catch up on some books that you might have missed from the year before, many of which sort of went under the radar but were fantastic in their own right anyway. So really exciting to see that, and I'll do a separate video that'll be out soon about the non-First Book Prize itself. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.